I held my daughter-in-law's phone, the screen shattered to pieces as if someone had stomped on it, and drove straight to a repair shop in Oak Park to give her a hand. I only thought simply, the girl was busy, her husband was away, and as the mother-in-law, if I could lighten her load in any way, then I should. But after finishing the check, the phone technician suddenly changed color. He didn't speak right there at the counter. He stepped away from his workstation, looked around once like he was afraid someone might overhear, then pulled me aside. His voice trembled, so low it was almost a whisper. "Ma'am, you need to cancel all your bank cards, change every password, and leave that house immediately." I froze, my heart clenching as if someone had gripped it tight. I asked again, panic catching in my throat. "What is it? What are you saying?" He didn't answer with words. He just opened the phone and turned the screen toward me. And the instant I saw the lines of text there, the blood in my body felt like it turned to ice. But before I go on, if you like stories where one small moment flips an entire life upside down, please hit subscribe to help me out. And while you're at it, tell me where you're listening from, so I know which cities we're sitting side by side in today. My name is Gloria Banks. I'm 65 years old, and until 3 days ago, I still thought I had an ordinary, peaceful, even happy life. I live in a quiet house in Naperville, Illinois, with my husband Leonard. He's 67. We both retired not too long ago, still learning how to settle into a new rhythm. Slower, lighter, and seemingly beyond the reach of anything that could startle us anymore. I used to be a history teacher. Leonard was an engineer. We have only one son, Jalen. Jalen has been married for 5 years to Simone, and honestly, I always liked my daughter-in-law. Simone graduated in business administration, smart, beautiful, and working for a large financial consulting firm. Jalen met Simone at a friend's party, and the two of them got married less than a year later. Everything happened fast, but I thought, it must be fate. I always felt Simone was a little distant. Not rude or disrespectful, just that there was an invisible space. But I reassured myself it was because her job was stressful and her personality was quiet. Until last Wednesday. And in the next part, I'll tell you why Simone came to see me alone that day, why she handed me that shattered phone, and the horrifying thing the technician, Terrence Cole, saw inside it, the thing that made him warn me to leave the house immediately. To help you understand how the earthquake that came later could shatter my life in just a few days, I need to take you back, to the time before everything collapsed, before I learned a smile could be a mask, before I understood that sometimes the most dangerous thing doesn't come from strangers, but from the very people you love most. The house in Naperville, Illinois isn't big, but it's warm and cozy. 3 bedrooms, a small backyard, where Leonard grows tomatoes and basil every summer, tending to them like he's tending to a piece of his youth. I still remember clearly the day we bought that house, 40 years ago. Back then, Jalen was only a 3-year-old boy, running everywhere, pointing toward the backyard as he ran, asking with sparkling eyes, "Mom, can we hang a swing from that oak tree?" That oak tree is still there, and that swing once had its time as the center of my son's childhood. Leonard hung it up with his own hands. I remember him standing on a ladder, tightening bolts while muttering like an engineer. "It has to be secure. These ropes have to hold weight." I just laughed then. But for the next 20 years, that swing witnessed every stage of Jalen's life. First the squeals of laughter, his legs pumping hard like he wanted to fly into the sky. And later, when my son entered his teenage years, it became the place where he sat in silence, swaying slowly, thinking about things I could never fully ask him about. I also remember weekend mornings, Saturdays and Sundays, when Leonard made pancakes. The smell of butter and batter filled the kitchen, rich and warm. Jalen sat at the kitchen counter telling stories about his school basketball team, about missed shots, narrow wins, talking as if it were the biggest thing in the world. I remember the way my son would wrap me in a tight hug every time he came home to visit after starting college, the hug of a child who still wanted to be little, even though his body had grown tall. And I remember Jalen and Simone's wedding, a beautiful day in August. Golden sunlight poured down like honey. The air was both radiant and gentle. Leonard cried as he walked our son down the aisle. I cried too, not because I was sad, but because something inside me stirred in a way I couldn't quite name. Pride, emptiness, and the painful feeling of time passing too fast. Our son has grown up, Leonard whispered to me then, his voice trembling. And I was proud. I was proud of Jalen, a smart son, an excellent student, with a good job in information technology. I was proud that he still called to check on us every week, still remembered our birthdays, still said, "I'm fine, don't worry," in a voice that made me feel at peace. And Simone, in her own way, she cared too. Simone didn't talk much. That was something I noticed from the start. While other daughters-in-law in the neighborhood would chat and laugh loudly, Simone always listened more than she spoke. She was polite, smiled at the right moments, and spoke with perfect propriety. But there was always an invisible wall, a distance I didn't know how to cross. I once told Leonard about that feeling. He just waved it off, as if I was overthinking. "Gloria, you don't need to worry. Everyone has a different personality. Simone works a lot. She's under pressure. She's just a private person." And I believed that. I tried not to impose, not to interfere too deeply in our son's life. We met on holidays and sometimes had dinner on weekends. I told myself that was enough. Older parents shouldn't demand too much. As long as the children are safe, that's all that matters. But now that I think back, there were things I overlooked. Small details that seemed normal then, but now haunt me every night, like a film that keeps rewinding over and over and I can't turn it off. For example, the way Simone would glance around the house every time she visited, not with the cheerful curiosity of someone admiring it, but like she was assessing the value of each item, as if she was measuring, calculating, and recording it in her mind. Or the way she once asked about our insurance with a look of very reasonable concern. "Have you and Uncle updated your life insurance yet? There are a lot of good programs these days." And Jalen, over the past year or so, started mentioning more and more often that we weren't young anymore. "Mom, have you noticed you forget things more lately? Dad, has he been steady on his feet?" At the time, I only thought, children care about their aging parents. We were in our 60s. It was normal for Jalen to worry. I even felt warmed by it. I was proud, too, because my son was thoughtful. How foolish that was. Right here, I want you to ask yourself a question, a very real one. If that was your child, the child you held in your arms, the child you took to school, the child you stayed up all night with when they had a fever, the child you sacrificed so much for so they could have a future, and one day they asked you, "Mom, do you forget things a lot?" What would you think? You would think what I thought. You would think, "He loves me." You wouldn't think, "He's building a story." And because I thought that way, I opened the door for the storm to walk into my home without even realizing it. Last week, Leonard and I were still talking about a beach trip for next summer. We wanted to rent a small house along the Michigan shoreline, then invite Jalen and Simone to come with us, a family vacation like the ones we used to take. "This year, we'll cook fresh seafood every night," Leonard said, his eyes lighting up like a young man's, "and I'll teach Jalen to fish, like when he was little." I smiled, imagining peaceful afternoons, the sound of waves, the salty wind, laughter, and the feeling that our family was still whole, still intact. I even thought further ahead. I thought of something most mothers have thought of at least once: grandchildren. Jalen and Simone didn't have children yet, but I still hoped, not impatiently, just quietly. I had even started knitting a small scarf out of yellow wool, just to have it ready, in case one day there was good news. I didn't tell anyone. That was the silent kind of hope a mother carries. No one needs to know, as long as her heart has one corner left to believe. That was my life, simple, peaceful, filled with love and small plans for the future. And then, on Wednesday morning, everything collapsed. That morning, I remember it so clearly. Leonard and I sat at the kitchen table. October sunlight came through the window, soft, not harsh. I had just brewed a pot of chamomile tea, the gentle scent spreading like a lullaby. Leonard held the newspaper, occasionally reading out interesting parts to me. Then he looked up and said casually, "Hey, Gloria, there's an article here about protecting seniors from financial scams. We should read it. You can never be too careful." I laughed, a real laugh. Who would scam us? We don't have anything besides this house and a little pension money. Leonard laughed too, then shook his head. True, but better safe than sorry. If we had known what was waiting for us just a few hours later, would we have been able to sit there so calmly? And you'll understand very soon. Around 10 o'clock on Wednesday morning, the doorbell rang. I opened the door and stopped short when I saw Simone standing there, alone, with no Jalen beside her. That was the first unusual thing. Normally they only came by on weekends, and almost always together. Simone rarely showed up in the middle of the week like this, and to come alone, without warning, was even stranger. "Simone, come in. Is something wrong?" I asked, quickly pulling the door wider. Simone stepped inside, but she didn't sit down like she usually did. She stood right in the middle of the living room, clutching her large handbag tightly, looking rushed, like someone who had been racing against time. Her hair was slightly messy, nothing like her usual neatness. Her white blouse was wrinkled, as if she had climbed out of the car and walked straight into my house. "Mom, I have something urgent," Simone said quickly, her voice faintly trembling. "My phone screen is cracked. I dropped it early this morning, and now I can't use anything at all." She pulled the phone out and showed it to me. The screen was shattered like a spider web. The glass was so badly fractured that just looking at it made my spine go cold. "I need it fixed immediately," Simone went on, still rushing as if she couldn't afford to lose even a minute. "I have to fly out for a business trip this afternoon, but Jalen already left for his trip, and I don't know where to take it to get it repaired fast." I looked at the phone, then at my daughter-in-law's tense face. Inside me, two currents of thought pulled in opposite directions. Part of me found it strange. Naperville and Oak Park were full of repair shops. Why couldn't Simone find one herself? But the other part, the part of a mother who always wanted to help her children, felt warmth. At least she had thought of me. At least she needed me. "Oh," I said, trying to keep my voice normal. "I just had my own phone repaired in Oak Park last week. They're quick and careful there. If you need it urgently, I can take it in for you." A clear flicker of relief crossed Simone's face. "Thank you so much," she said, as if a weight had been lifted. "I'm really stuck. The passcode is 280218, the wedding date for me and Jalen. The technician will need it to check the device. I have to go to the office right now, but I'll come by tonight to pick it up." "All right," I nodded. "Go to work and don't worry." Simone handed me the phone. Her hands trembled slightly. At the time, I thought it was because of work pressure, the flight, the schedule. Looking back now, I understand. It was a different kind of anxiety. The anxiety of someone afraid that something would be exposed. Simone left as quickly as she had arrived. When the door closed, I stood still for a beat, staring at the phone in my hand, and suddenly it felt heavy in a way I couldn't explain, as if it was carrying something I didn't yet know. But then I brushed it off. I called into the house. "Leonard, I'm going to Oak Park. Simone asked me to get her phone repaired." From inside the bedroom, my husband's calm voice floated out. "Okay. Drive carefully." From Naperville to Oak Park was about a 40-minute drive. On the way, I kept thinking about Simone. Something in how she had shown up this morning left me unsettled. Too rushed, more than necessary. Her eyes kept darting quickly around the house like she was searching for something, or checking whether something that shouldn't be there was there. Or was I overthinking? Oak Park appeared with its distinctive old-world charm, rows of houses, tree-lined streets, yellow leaves scattered across the sidewalks. I parked in front of a small block near the center, where I had stopped by the week before. The shop sign was still there. Oak Park Mobile Repair, a small store wedged between a pharmacy and a pastry shop. I walked in. The faint scent of electronic plastic and circuit board dust hung in the air. Terrence Cole, the owner, was bent over his workbench, surrounded by tiny tools and specks of components. Terrence was the son of an old friend from my teaching days. He was about 30, wore glasses, had curly hair, and always looked careful and meticulous. Terrence looked up and smiled. "Hello, Mrs. Gloria. Good to see you again." "Hi, Terrence," I replied, holding out the phone. This time I brought my daughter-in-law's phone. The screen is shattered. She needs it repaired urgently. I handed him the device and told him the passcode. Terrence checked it quickly, then nodded with confidence. "No big problem, ma'am. Leave it here for about 3 hours and it'll be done. You can take a walk, grab coffee, then come back this afternoon to pick it up." "Thank you so much." I left the shop and strolled around the neighborhood for a bit, bought a few groceries, stopped by a bakery to pick up a couple of croissants to take home to Leonard. I had absolutely no idea that, while I was thinking about everyday things, Terrence was discovering something that would change my entire life. Do you know what the scariest thing is? Not the moment I saw the cracked phone, not Simone standing in my living room with that rushed posture, but the feeling that you're living perfectly normally, buying pastries, choosing groceries, thinking about dinner, while somewhere, fate has already turned the page, and you don't know it yet. And in just a few minutes, I would walk back into that shop to receive the phone after it was fixed. I thought I was picking up a device, but what I was about to receive was a sentence. Around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, I returned to the shop. The instant I reached the door, I could feel the atmosphere was completely different. Terrence stood near the entrance, repeatedly looking outside like he was waiting for someone. When he saw me, he hurried to open the door, pulled me in faster than usual, and flipped the sign on the glass door to closed. I startled. "Terrence, what's going on?" Terrence's face was grave. The friendly smile from the morning was gone. He glanced around once like he feared someone might be listening, then pulled me closer and lowered his voice. "Mrs. Gloria, the phone is repaired, but you have to listen to me. You need to cancel all your bank cards, change every password, and leave your house immediately." I stood rigid, my heart starting to pound. "Why? What happened?" Terrence looked at me, and there was something in his eyes I couldn't quite name. Worry, fear, and also pity. "I didn't mean to look," he said quickly, "but after I fixed it, I had to test the phone to make sure it worked properly. Then a notification popped up, and I saw—" Terrence swallowed hard, as if gathering every ounce of courage. "You need to see it for yourself." He opened Simone's phone, tapped a few times, then went into the Notes app. A note appeared with the title, Plan B. Terrence didn't look for long. He simply turned the screen toward me. I bent closer, and the whole world seemed to stop spinning. In front of me was a long string of messages copied into the note. It was a chat log between Jalen and Simone. I saw my son's name, Jalen, there clearly, and I saw Simone's name right below it, replying coldly. It wasn't an argument. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't some petty money issue. It was a plan about exploiting the idea that Mom is forgetful, about getting a doctor to document what they wanted, about a life insurance policy worth nearly $2 million, about selling the house, about starting over somewhere else. And the most horrifying part was this: none of it could happen unless I disappeared. And then Leonard. I read it again, once more, then one more time. No, it couldn't be. My hands shook so badly I had to grip the edge of the counter to keep from collapsing. My breath felt trapped in my throat. "No, it can't be real," I forced out in a hoarse whisper. But Terrence scrolled down. It was still there. There was more. So much more. They discussed how to make everything look natural, how to arrange the timing, how to make sure no one would suspect anything. Step by step, step by step. I couldn't read any further. My head spun. The room seemed to tilt. My stomach clenched like someone was squeezing it hard. I had to turn my face away, because if I looked for even one more second, I felt like I would vomit right there. "Please, sit down," Terrence said, rushing to support me, guiding me to a chair nearby. He poured a glass of water and put it in my hand. I drank quickly, but it felt like a stone was lodged across my throat. I couldn't swallow. I couldn't breathe properly. "No, No. I shook my head, my voice breaking. Jalen is my son. I gave birth to him. I raised him. Images flashed through my mind like shards of glass cutting into my heart. Jalen at 2 years old, clinging to me when he was afraid of thunder. Jalen at 10, proudly showing me his first certificate of achievement. Jalen at 18, sobbing in my arms when his best friend died in an accident. How could that child become the person in these lines? Terrence sat lower, his voice softer but firm. Mrs. Gloria, I know this is unbearable, but you have to act right now. This is a serious plot. They're not joking. I nodded, but my mind was tangled like a spool of thread yanked apart. What do I do now? Call the police, Terrence answered immediately. Hearing that, my heart tightened. No one will believe me, I said, trembling. It's just the word of an old woman, against my son and my daughter-in-law. 2 people the whole neighborhood respects. Who would believe it? Terrence shook his head, decisive. Then you have to protect yourself and gather evidence. I'll help you. I pulled out my own phone. My hands were shaking so badly I had to take several deep breaths before I could even tap the screen. I photographed every part of the content on Simone's phone, every section, every line, every detail. Each time I pressed the shutter, it felt like I was driving a nail, straight into my own mother's heart. Dates, times, the words they used to build the story of Mom is forgetful, and the parts about manipulating our family doctor, creating a false record that I had memory decline. I looked up at Terrence, forcing my voice to hold steady. You have to restore this phone exactly as it was. Don't leave any trace. Terrence nodded at once. Yes, ma'am. I understand. He worked in silence, and I sat there, staring at the wall in front of me, feeling as if my soul had been ripped out of my body. I could think of only one thing. How am I supposed to go home now? How am I supposed to look Leonard in the face without falling apart, knowing that our only son wants to kill both of us? When I stepped out of the phone repair shop in Oak Park, the sky had turned a dull gray. Or maybe it was just my feeling. I wasn't even sure anymore. I only knew that everything around me suddenly became blurred and distant, as if I was walking through a nightmare with no way to wake up. In my hand was Simone's phone, now repaired perfectly, glossy, not a single crack left, but I held it as if I were holding a bomb. Every step toward my car felt so heavy that I could almost sense someone dragging me down to the ground. I drove from Oak Park back to Naperville, but I could barely remember what roads I took. My mind was spinning. The words from that note kept flaring in my head, looping over and over like a horror film that refused to end. Life insurance, nearly $2 million. Once we sell the house, we'll have enough to start over. I know the dosage, enough to trigger a heart attack within a few weeks. A few weeks after your mother. It has to be an accident, too. At one point, my hands shook so violently I couldn't keep hold of the steering wheel. I had to pull over to the side of the road, sitting rigid, gasping as if I'd been running from something invisible. But I knew I wasn't running from something invisible. I was running from my own son, the son I carried in my body for 9 months, delivered in pain, raised for 35 years. And now, he was planning to kill me, just for money. Finally, I made it home. When I parked in front of the house, it looked the same as always. Peaceful, warm, the fence neat, the yellow chrysanthemums Leonard had planted along the walkway still bright and blooming. But inside me, everything had changed. As if this place was no longer a home, but a trap. I stepped inside. Leonard was sitting on the sofa watching the news, as usual. His gentle face, his white hair. Just looking at him made my tears threaten to spill. How could I tell the man who had walked beside me for 45 years that our son wanted to kill both of us? "Did you get Simone's phone fixed?" Leonard asked, his eyes still on the TV. "It's fixed," I answered, but my voice sounded duller than I intended. Leonard immediately sensed something was wrong. He turned off the TV at once and looked at me more closely. "Gloria, what's wrong? You don't look okay." I stood there, gripping my handbag tightly. Inside it was my phone, with dozens of photos of those messages, evidence of something I never imagined I would face, a crime planned by my own son. "Leonard," I said, my voice shaking so much I had to swallow hard before I could continue. "You have to listen to me. This is very serious." Leonard stood up and came over, placing his hands on my shoulders. "What is it, Gloria?" I sat down. Leonard sat beside me. I opened my phone, pulled up the photos, and handed it to him. "Just look." Leonard lowered his gaze to the screen. I watched his face change second by second, first confusion, then shock, then fear, and finally a pain so deep I thought he might collapse. "It can't be," Leonard whispered, his throat tightening. "Jalen, he can't do this." "I thought so too," I said, and tears streamed down my face before I even realized it. "But it's his number, the way he writes. I recognize it instantly," and Simone replied from her phone. "This phone right here." Leonard closed his eyes, taking a deep breath as if trying to keep himself from breaking. When he opened them again, his gaze was different. The pain was still there, but it shifted into clarity and resolve. "What do we do now?" he asked. I grabbed his hand. That hand, over the past 45 years, had held mine through every stormy season. And today, that same hand had to hold me as we stepped into a battle against our own child. "We have to document everything," I said, forcing my voice to be as steady as possible. "Check the bank accounts, change passwords, cancel cards, and we need to find out which doctor they've pulled into this. We have to act normal, but quietly gather enough evidence to give to the police when the time comes." I drew a deep breath, then continued. "Simone is coming tonight to pick up her phone. We have to stay calm." Leonard frowned, fury rising in his eyes. "How can you look her in the face without exploding?" I tried to smile, even though my lips were trembling. "One step at a time, Leonard. Our lives depend on it." Right after that, we opened the computer and logged into our online bank accounts. And then, the next blow hit. Small withdrawals, steady every week for the past 3 months. 700 this time, 800 the next. As if someone was deliberately withdrawing small amounts so we wouldn't notice. Altogether, nearly $10,000. Leonard stared at the screen, his voice turning hoarse with bitterness. "Jalen has access to our account." He turned to me, his eyes full of self-reproach. "Last year, we gave him financial power of attorney, remember, in case anything happened." I remembered that day clearly. We had sat in the lawyer's office, signing papers with absolute trust. Because Jalen was our only son, the person we trusted most in the world. We only wanted that if something unforeseen happened, our son could handle things for us. And we never imagined we had handed him the key to destroy us. "Change the passwords immediately," I said, my voice turning cold. "Cancel every card he can touch, and tell the bank to block all large transactions unless both of us show up in person to confirm." We worked in silence, changing passwords, canceling cards, calling the bank. Each step felt like building another layer of protection, but at the same time, it felt like closing a door inside my heart. The door that led to trust in my own son. Do you know, what terrified me most in that moment wasn't only that money had been taken, it was the clear sense that they had been preparing for a long time. Not a moment of anger, not a passing thought, but a plan paved with paperwork, files, gentle withdrawals, and an entire memory loss story being built day by day. And what was even more terrifying was this. Tonight, Simone would come back, stand at my door, smile at me, talk to me, as if nothing had ever happened. Leonard looked at me. "What about Dr. Parker?" Dr. William Parker had been our family doctor for more than 15 years. He had treated me during my breast cancer 5 years ago. He had helped Leonard through a severe case of pneumonia last winter. Sometimes he even stopped by our house for dinner like a friend. Thinking about the possibility that he might have helped falsify my medical records, that pain was no less than discovering Jalen's plot. "Tomorrow I'll make an appointment to see him," I said. I want to hear from his own mouth what this so-called memory loss of mine is." Leonard nodded, his jaw clenched tight. "Good. We need to know which side he's on." At exactly 7 in the evening, the doorbell rang. Leonard and I looked at each other. He gripped my hand, an unspoken promise that we would stand together no matter what we had to face. I took a deep breath, forced myself into a smile, and opened the door. Simone stood there, elegant, as always, her wavy brown hair neatly brushed, her black suit pressed down to every crease. But now, that polished appearance no longer looked like professionalism to me. It looked like a mask. "Mom, I'm sorry I'm late," Simone said, her voice sweet and just polite enough. "Is the phone fixed okay?" "It's all taken care of," I replied, handing her the phone. "Terrence did a great job. It looks brand new." Simone powered it on, checked a few things, then smiled. "Perfect. Thank you so much. Let me pay you back." "No need," I said quickly, trying to keep my tone light. "Terrence fixed it for free. I'm a long-time regular." Simone paused, just for a beat. Only a beat, but it was enough for me to see it. Her eyebrows drew together, like a flicker of worry passed through her. What was she thinking? Was she wondering whether Terrence had seen something? "Are you sure?" Simone asked, forcing a smile. "I don't want to trouble anyone." "It's fine," I said. "Would you like to come in for tea? Your father is inside watching TV." Simone immediately shook her head. "I can't, ma'am. I have an early presentation tomorrow morning. I need to prepare." As she spoke, she avoided looking me in the eye. Her voice was calm, but her gaze wasn't. Now I knew what I needed to watch for. And it was strange. Little gestures I used to overlook suddenly became clues. The way she tightened her grip on her bag strap, the way she stood slightly angled like she was ready to turn and leave, the way she spoke faster than usual. "I understand," I said softly. "When is Jalen coming back?" "Tomorrow night," Simone answered far too quickly. A clumsy lie. I had seen in the messages that Jalen was at home, waiting for Simone to report back. "Tell him to stop by," I said, keeping my voice casual as if I knew nothing. "We miss him so much. It's been 2 weeks since we've seen him." "Yes, Jalen misses you both a lot too," Simone replied, her smile a little stiff. Then, as if she suddenly remembered something, she slipped in another sweet little needle. "Oh, by the way, have you gone to see the neurologist Jalen recommended yet?" My stomach tightened, but I kept my face calm. "Not yet. I haven't had time." Simone nodded, her voice gentle but guiding. "Jalen says you've been forgetful lately. People's names, appointments. Is that true?" I smiled, forcing it to sound like a light joke. "My memory is still fine. Actually, I remember very clearly. You wore that suit at Linda's birthday party last month." A flash of surprise crossed Simone's eyes, so quick that if I hadn't been on high alert, I would have missed it. Then she quickly recovered into a smile. "Well, it's still good to get checked for peace of mind, especially at your age." I nodded. "You're right. I'll arrange it soon." Simone said one more goodbye, then turned and left. Only when the door closed did I realize my back was cold with sweat. I leaned against the door, exhausted from having to play a normal mother in front of the woman who, together with my son, was planning to kill me. Leonard was waiting in the living room, his face stretched tight like a drawn wire. "What did she say?" he asked. "She tried to steer me into the memory loss story," I replied, my voice low and tired. "They're building the script ahead of time. So when we die, everyone will think it was natural." Leonard clenched his fists, shaking with anger. "So what do we do now?" I lifted my head, and in that moment, I felt something replacing fear, not peace, but resolve. "We act," I said firmly. "Tomorrow morning, I'll meet Dr. Parker. Then we check the life insurance. We need to know what Jalen has changed. And then we set our own trap." And when I said that, I knew one thing. From this moment on, this was no longer a family. This was a war for survival. That night, I barely slept. The smallest sound was enough to make me jolt. I got up 3 times just to check the locks. The third time, I stepped into the hallway and saw Leonard in the kitchen pouring water, his body stiff as a statue. His eyes were red from lack of sleep and from pain. "I keep thinking about Jalen when he was little," Leonard whispered, his voice rough. "He was afraid of the dark. Every time there was a storm, he'd crawl into our bed. Where did that boy go, Gloria?" I didn't know how to answer. How could a child who once pressed into his parents for safety become someone so cold and calculating? I stepped forward and held Leonard tightly. "We'll find out," I murmured, as much to him as to myself. "And we will survive." The next morning, I called Dr. William Parker's clinic and told them directly I needed to be seen for something urgent. They scheduled me for late morning. But before we left the house, Leonard and I checked our bank account again, and we discovered something worse than all those small withdrawals. A new life insurance policy under my name had been opened 3 months ago, and I had absolutely no idea. "What is this?" I blurted out, my throat tightening as if someone had squeezed it shut. Leonard scrolled down to the electronic documents, his trembling finger pointing at the screen. "Look, that's your signature." I leaned in close. My heart seemed to stop. "No, that isn't my signature. They forged it." Leonard spoke very softly, as if the words might make the house collapse. "And the payout is $1.5 million. Jalen is the sole beneficiary." My whole body went cold. This was no longer a plan. This was an entire criminal system. Forged documents, stolen money, a manipulated doctor, and now an insurance policy sitting there, waiting for the day it would pay out when I died in an accident. At the clinic, everything was strangely quiet. The receptionist still smiled politely. "Hello, Mrs. Banks. Dr. Parker will see you now." I walked in and immediately sensed something was off. Dr. Parker, who was usually so friendly, looked unsettled today. His eyes shifted, as if he was waiting for a question he didn't want to answer. "Gloria, what a surprise," he said, trying to keep his tone normal. "Jalen called me yesterday. He said you didn't want to do a cognitive test." I sat down, forcing my voice to stay calm. "That's strange, because I'm the one who asked for this appointment." He gave a small cough, then continued as if reading a prepared script. "I heard from Jalen that you've shown concerning signs, forgetting names, mixing up dates." I smiled, but the smile didn't reach my eyes. "Interesting, because I don't recall having any problem." Dr. Parker hesitated. "Sometimes patients don't recognize symptoms. In fact, he already had a preliminary note placed in your file." I raised an eyebrow. "Based on what?" "Jalen showed me a few videos. You forgetting dates, forgetting names." "Videos?" My heart tightened. "I want to see them." He went silent for a beat, then shook his head. "He didn't leave a copy." I leaned forward, my voice no longer gentle. "Dr. Parker, I've been your patient for 15 years. Do you truly believe I'm losing my mind? Or do you simply believe my son?" His silence answered more than any words. Finally, he exhaled, his shoulders sinking. "Jalen came to see me several times. He said you and Leonard couldn't take care of yourselves anymore, and he asked me to document any signs of cognitive decline. I only recorded what he reported. I did not make an official diagnosis." I stared directly into his eyes, each word dropping like stone. "Doctor, my son is planning to kill me and my husband." His face went pale. "What?" "Gloria, that is an extremely serious accusation." "I have evidence." I opened my phone and showed him the screenshots. "Now I understand why Jalen needed you, to create a medical file that makes my death look natural." He bent down to read, and I watched each layer of emotion change on his face. Confusion, shock, then genuine horror. "My God, I didn't know. I thought he was worried about you." "I want to see my medical record right now," I said, my voice turning cold. He opened his computer and turned the screen toward me. It read, "Patient shows signs of cognitive decline as reported by her son. Frequently confused, disoriented, forgets names and recent events. Recommend comprehensive neurological evaluation. I read each line, feeling as if I were reading a stamped verdict against myself. This information is fabricated, and you know it, I said. I only recorded what was reported. There's no official conclusion. But you created a record that can be used against me, I met his gaze. A perfect cover layer for murder. He swallowed. What do you want me to do? Print that record and sign it, I said firmly. Then create a new record stating clearly, today you examined me and found no evidence of cognitive decline. He nodded immediately, his hands still shaking as he typed. And when the printer started running, I added, slowly but with certainty, if anything happens to me or Leonard, this record and our conversation today will be the first thing the police look at. He looked at me, terrified and awake at the same time. I understand. When I stepped out of the clinic, a chill ran through me. Jalen didn't just want to kill us. He wanted to kill us in a way no one would dare question. A natural death, a memory loss file, a doctor who wrote according to reports. And I had only just peeled back one layer. I held the stack of printed documents and drove straight to the bank to revoke every authorization Jalen held. The branch manager, Mr. Martin, looked at me in surprise. Are you sure, Mrs. Banks? Your son came just last week. He said you and Mr. Banks wanted to expand his authority because Mr. Robert hasn't been well lately. Another lie. Robert was completely healthy. I took a deep breath so my voice wouldn't shake. My husband is very healthy, Mr. Martin. And yes, I'm sure. I want to see every transaction for the past 6 months. We reviewed statements for nearly an hour. Beyond the small withdrawals, there was something that made my throat seize. Jalen had requested a replacement credit card under Robert's name, claiming it was lost. We issued a new card because he had authorization, Mr. Martin said quietly, regret in his voice. Cancel it immediately, I said, gripping my bag strap, and block any future requests unless both of us are physically present. On the way home, my phone rang. The name that appeared made my heart sting. Jalen. I forced myself to take a deep breath, then answered. Hi, sweetheart. Hi, Mom, Jalen said, his voice calm in a way that was terrifying. How are you? Simone said you helped her get her phone fixed. You're so kind. Every word sounded like a normal family call, but in my ears it was like a blade scraping stone. It's nothing, I replied, keeping my tone light. Terrence is the son of an old friend of mine. He gave us a big discount. Great, Jalen chuckled softly. Simone and I are thinking of coming over for dinner tonight. It's been a while since the whole family ate together, hasn't it? A shiver ran down my spine. So sudden. Was it because they were suspicious? Or were they just testing us? Or preparing something even worse? Of course, I said, as gently as I could. I'll make lasagna, the one you like. Perfect, Mom. Oh, and did you go see the doctor I recommended? Simone said you hadn't. I tightened my grip on the phone. I did. I saw Dr. Parker this morning. On the other end, silence. A silence that was unusually long. What did he say? Jalen finally asked, his voice trying to sound normal. Nothing serious. He said my memory is completely normal. Silence again. Longer. Oh, that's great, Jalen said, but his voice had changed. But maybe you should get further testing. Dr. Parker is sometimes too cautious. I'll think about it. See you tonight. Yes, Mom. 7 o'clock. I hung up. My hands were shaking so badly, I had to set the phone down on the passenger seat so I wouldn't drop it. It was a conversation that sounded ordinary, but the tension underneath was suffocating. Jalen had wanted the doctor to confirm my memory loss, and when he heard the opposite, he immediately became uneasy. That dinner invitation was not a coincidence. Either they were coming to probe us, or to do something far worse. When I got home, Leonard was already sitting at the dining table in front of a whole sea of paperwork. The printed record from the clinic, bank statements, and notes he had hurriedly written. His face was so tense that just looking at him made my throat tighten. "Was the doctor involved?" Leonard asked immediately, no preamble. I told him everything, every detail, how Jalen had manipulated Dr. Parker to build a false medical record, how he accessed our accounts, withdrawing small amounts steadily like a habit, how they forged life insurance documents, and finally, the call just now, the sudden dinner invitation, the chillingly calm voice of my own son. "They're coming tonight," I said, and it felt like I was reading out a sentence. Leonard turned pale. "Do you think they suspect we know something now?" "I'm not sure," I answered, forcing my voice to stay steady. "But Jalen isn't at ease after hearing the doctor didn't confirm the memory loss story, and once he starts to panic, he'll want to take control immediately." We looked at each other. Without saying it, we were both thinking the same question. What are they planning to do tonight? "We won't eat or drink anything they bring," Leonard said firmly, "and one of us has to keep eyes on them at all times." I nodded. "Do you still have that old digital voice recorder in the study?" Leonard sprang up. "Yes, I'll get it right now." We tested the recorder right there, clear audio, battery long enough, then placed it under the dining table, tight to the inner edge, hidden by the long tablecloth. From a normal angle, no one could see it. If anything slipped out tonight, we had to keep it. That afternoon, I made lasagna like I'd promised. My hands still chopped tomatoes, mixed sauce, sprinkled cheese. But in my mind, those cold messages about our deaths kept replaying, as if someone's fingers were squeezing my chest. How did it come to this? I asked myself, so quietly only I could hear. Where did we go wrong? Leonard stood beside me for a long time, then placed his hand on my shoulder, saying nothing. But that light touch felt like a vow. No matter what happened, we would get through it together. At exactly 7 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Leonard and I exchanged one last look. The recorder under the table was running. The plan was simple: act natural, observe every detail, and if possible, make them expose themselves. I opened the door with a strained smile. Jalen stood there, holding a bottle of wine. Simone stood beside him, lifting a box of chocolates, the kind I liked. "Mom!" Jalen wrapped his arms around me. The hug that once used to warm my heart now made my skin prickle. I stood still and let him hold me, but my mind held only one thought. How can you touch your mother when you've planned to kill her? "It's been a while, Mom," Jalen said, then held out the wine like a gift. "I brought something special for tonight." I took it and flicked my eyes quickly at the label. An expensive bottle that once would have impressed me. But now, the only thing I could think was, is there something else inside? Leonard came out to greet them. He wore the same strained smile I did, then quickly offered water, coffee, juice, anything but the wine they'd brought. "Wait, Mom," Jalen said as he sat down on the sofa. "Save that bottle for dinner." We talked for about half an hour. Weather, news, work, harmless, meaningless things. The fake atmosphere grew thick enough to suffocate. I noticed they kept exchanging looks. Simone watched every small movement I made, like she was measuring whether I would forget something. And Jalen kept circling around questions about daily habits, medication, and my recent difficulties, the difficulties he wanted me to have. "So how was your appointment this morning?" Jalen asked, sounding casual, but his eyes were probing. I kept my face neutral. "Just a routine checkup, nothing to worry about." "Strange," Jalen frowned. "Dr. Parker told me he suspects early-stage Alzheimer's." I paused for exactly one beat, not from fear, but because I could hear clearly the sound of a trap, snapping shut on the one who said it. "Oh, really?" I replied, pretending surprise. "When did he say that?" Jalen blinked. I saw him realize his mistake. Last week," Jalen stammered, then hurried to correct himself. "Last week when I called him." "Called about what?" I asked, still gentle. "About how you've been forgetful lately." He tried to smile. "Don't you remember?" Last week you forgot the neighbor's name and left the stove on for hours. Not a single word of it was true. It was all pieces of the memory loss story they were building. I stayed so calm that even I was surprised. Funny, I said slowly. I spoke with her yesterday and remembered her name very clearly, and I haven't used the stove all week. I've only reheated food in the microwave. Jalen's smile dipped, the corner of his mouth twitching. Leonard immediately cut in to break the rising tension like a tide. Let's eat. Gloria's lasagna smells amazing. During dinner, the performance continued, but more subtly. I brought the lasagna to the table while Leonard quietly swapped the wine glasses. Our plan was clear. Pretend we were drinking the wine they brought, but actually use another bottle we had already prepared in the kitchen. Let's raise a glass, Jalen said, lifting his, to family and good health. We lifted ours as well. I brought the glass to my lips, pretending to sip. I watched them drink normally, no hesitation, no testing for a reaction. Maybe the wine wasn't tampered with. Or maybe they weren't going to do it that way yet. Simone set down her fork and smiled gently, a cold smile. Mom, Jalen and I have been worried about you two living alone in this big house, with everything lately. I think maybe you should move somewhere smaller, or we could move in with you, to take care of you. I felt Leonard stiffen beside me. So this was it. Not just concern. They wanted to move into our home, so it would be easier to control us, easier to strike. So thoughtful, I said evenly, but your father and I are still healthy, right, Leonard? Completely healthy, Leonard answered immediately. In fact, we're planning a beach trip soon. Jalen shot a quick look at Simone. Traveling now? He said, trying to sound calm. Don't you think that's not very wise with your health and everything? Everything is fine, I cut in, not letting him steer the story back to illness. We can go whenever we want, when we choose. Simone smiled awkwardly, her eyes still icy. Then let me help book the tickets. It's no trouble. No need, I interrupted. We can handle it ourselves. The air at the table tightened like a drawn wire. Every sentence carried two meanings. Every laugh rang hollow. And I realized they didn't come just for dinner. They came to check, to see whether we were still within their control. When I brought dessert out, cheesecake, Jalen placed his hand on the table, as if preparing to step into the main part. Mom, he said, in a falsely gentle voice, I spoke with a lawyer. He said we can set up full power of attorney for me, just in case of emergencies. What kind of emergency? Leonard asked, calm enough to make me proud, and heartbroken at the same time. For example, if one of you has to be hospitalized, or if Mom's memory gets worse. Jalen shrugged, as if saying something obvious. Then I can make medical and financial decisions for you both. I looked at my son. That face once fit perfectly in the palm of my hand. I took photos of him on his graduation day. I once believed that if I loved him enough, he would become a good man. But in that moment, what I saw was a stranger. No need, I said slowly. We just updated our paperwork recently. I paused for exactly one beat. In fact, we even changed the insurance beneficiary. Jalen froze. Changed it how? He asked, trying to keep his voice normal, but the urgency leaked through. Leonard stepped in at the perfect moment, lying smoothly enough that I silently thanked him for his steadiness. Nothing major, just making sure everything is clear if something happens. Attorney Mark, the one you recommended, helped a lot. There was no attorney Mark, but the way Leonard mentioned a lawyer, and even said Jalen had introduced him, threw Jalen and Simone off rhythm. I saw Simone tighten her hand slightly on her thigh, and Jalen stared down at his wine glass longer than usual. There was a very short moment, only a few seconds, when all four of us fell silent. In that moment, I understood the most terrifying part of this dinner, not what they were saying, but what they were calculating when they weren't speaking. Because from the instant Leonard said lawyer and I said changed the beneficiary, their eyes had shifted. No longer probing, but recalculating. And when someone recalculates a murder plan, It usually means the victim's time is running out. Near 10 o'clock, Jalen glanced at his watch and stood up with a thin smile. "We should go. We have to wake up early tomorrow." I knew the real reason. They needed to leave so they could talk through the plan again, so they could decide the next step. They hugged us, fake hugs and empty goodbyes. Simone even turned back to say, "Mom, make sure you get plenty of rest." I only nodded, not daring to let any emotion show on my face. When the door finally closed, Leonard and I nearly collapsed into our chairs at the same time, exhausted as if we had just run through a storm. "They're suspicious," Leonard whispered. "They know something has changed." I nodded, my hands still icy cold. I bent down and pulled out the recorder. We listened to the entire thing again. Everything was clear. Jalen's voice when he mentioned Alzheimer's, his flustered correction when questioned, the way Simone suggested moving in, the power of attorney proposal. Each line was another step toward absolute control. "They'll act soon," Leonard said, his voice hoarse. "They can't wait any longer." "We need more evidence," I replied. "This recording matters, but it still isn't enough for the police to act immediately. If we confront them now, they'll deny it and become even more careful." That night, we checked the locks twice before going to bed. I kept my phone right next to my pillow. Leonard wedged a chair against the bedroom door. Measures I never imagined I would have to take, just to protect ourselves from our own son. The next morning, I had only just dozed off for a little while when the sound of tires braking in front of the house jolted me fully awake. A black SUV pulled up tight to the curb, and then Simone stepped out, alone, 8 in the morning, a work day, no Jalen with her. I turned and called softly, my voice still hoarse from lack of sleep. "Leonard, Simone's here." I hurried to the door. I opened it before she even had the chance to ring the bell. Simone paused for a beat, a flicker of surprise in her eyes, but only for a few seconds. Then she immediately pulled her face back into the right role, a polite smile, a sweet voice, an attitude as if nothing had happened. "Gloria, I'm on my way to work. I thought I'd stop by to bring you some documents Jalen prepared," she said, lifting a yellow folder as she spoke. I stared straight at that folder. Just the way she held it sent a chill down my spine, as if it wasn't paperwork inside, but a noose. "Come in," I said, forcing my voice to sound natural. "It'll be easier to look at them inside." Simone seemed hesitant, but in the end she stepped in, like someone who no longer had a way back. Leonard was already standing by the table. He didn't say much. He simply opened the folder and turned each page slowly, and it was exactly what we had guessed. New power of attorney documents meant to grant Jalen absolute decision-making authority, along with an intake form for admission to a memory care facility, with the signature line left blank, waiting for us to sign it with our own hands. Leonard set the folder down on the table. He looked Simone straight in the eye. "Thank you," he said, his voice calm to the point of cold, "but we won't be signing." Simone opened her mouth as if to say something. Leonard didn't give her the chance to steer the story in another direction. "Actually," he continued, "we're revoking the power of attorney from last year." The air in the room seemed to get sucked out. Simone froze. Then she shot up too fast, the chair scraping hard against the floor. I really have to go," she said, her voice higher than usual. I watched her. The way she avoided our eyes, the way she shoved the folder back into her bag like she was hiding a crime, it all said one thing: they were losing control. The moment Simone left the house, Leonard and I didn't waste a single second. We photographed every page in the folder, every line, every field left blank, every section that showed signs of coercion, and sent it immediately to Stella. Then we drove straight to see attorney Danielle Kincaid. Danielle listened very carefully. She didn't interrupt, just took notes. But the more she heard, the more serious her face became. When I finished, Danielle set her pen down and looked straight at us. "You're facing multiple serious crimes," she said clearly. "Forgery, fraud, and conspiracy to commit murder." I felt Leonard squeeze my hand under the table, as if hearing it said out loud was enough to make a person unsteady. Danielle continued, decisive like someone used to walking into legal battles. I'll prepare documents to revoke every authorization, and I'll also arrange written confirmation that you both have full mental capacity. But the most important thing, she paused for a beat, is that you should not go home tonight. That single sentence made my stomach tighten. Because if even a lawyer said that, it meant we had stepped into truly dangerous territory. From the attorney's office, we went straight to the police station. The officer who took our report was named Marcus Delaney. He listened without showing suspicion or dismissiveness. On the contrary, the more he heard, the darker his eyes became. When I handed over the photos and explained, Marcus nodded slowly. "I'm assigning a detective immediately," he said, "and I'll arrange discreet surveillance on your home." He leaned toward us, his voice dropping, but steady. "Let my team install hidden surveillance cameras first. If they come back, we'll have solid evidence." I took a deep breath. For the first time in days, I felt like someone was standing on our side. And right then, I suddenly realized something that made my heart pound. This was the first time since everything began that I wasn't forced to perform alone anymore. It wasn't just Leonard and me trembling in our familiar house, pretending everything was normal to survive. Now the game had changed its rules. If Jalen and Simone thought they were hunting prey, they were about to learn what it felt like to be hunted back. On the way out of the station, my phone rang. The name on the screen hit like a punch. Jalen. Marcus Delaney stood beside me and raised a hand, one short nod. "Answer. Act natural." I swallowed hard, lifted the phone, and forced my voice to sound as gentle as possible. "Yes, sweetheart?" Jalen's voice came through calm, as if he were calling to check in on an ordinary afternoon. "Where are you, Mom? I just stopped by the house and no one was there." My heart lurched. He had come to the house, which meant he was checking, which meant he had started to get impatient. I looked at Marcus. He didn't speak, only gave a small nod, signaling me to stick to the agreed script. "Oh, we're out shopping at the mall," I answered, trying to keep my tone easy. "Is that right?" Jalen went quiet for a beat, then continued, his voice sweet as honey. "I have a surprise for you. I brought the wine you like. Let's sit down and talk about the paperwork." I heard every word clearly, and I also heard the shadow behind every word. "Okay," I replied, forcing my breathing to stay even. "We'll be home in about half an hour." "Good, I'll wait." The moment I hung up, the officers immediately called in over the radio. "Suspect is inside the house. Maintain distance. Keep surveillance." Marcus looked at me, his voice firm as a nail being driven in. "You did very well. Now we wait." We didn't go back right away. Following instructions, we went to a nearby coffee shop, close enough to respond quickly, but far enough not to ruin the operation. I sat there unable to swallow even a sip of water. Leonard couldn't either. The two of us just stared at the clock, hearing our heartbeats like pounding in our chests. 40 minutes passed like 40 years. Then Marcus's radio crackled. The voice on the other end was urgent, clipped. "We've got something big." I looked at Leonard. Leonard looked at me. And in that moment, I understood. The righteous trap had just snapped shut. At the police station, Lieutenant Marcus Delaney led Leonard and me into a small room. Cold white light poured down onto the table, making everything look even more exposed. He pointed at the screen. "Mr. and Mrs. Banks, you're going to want to see this." I had only just sat down when the footage appeared. Hidden surveillance inside our house. On the screen, Jalen walked into the kitchen with 2 plastic bags. He wasn't rushing. He wasn't panicking. Every movement was chillingly calm, like someone doing something he had done before. Jalen pulled several pill bottles from the bag, opened the cabinet where we kept our daily medication, and sat down. He mixed the contents of the bottles into our medicine, methodical, careful, as if preparing a dosage he had already calculated. I lifted a hand to cover my mouth. My throat locked. Then Jalen moved to the dining table. He opened the wine bottle. the favorite wine he had just said he would bring to me. He pulled a small packet of white powder from his bag, poured it into the bottle, and shook it thoroughly. Then he resealed it in a very professional way, as if he didn't want to leave a single trace. And he wasn't done. Jalen bent down, reached under the table, and attached a small device to the underside. Neat, fast, secure. I heard myself inhale sharply, but I didn't feel the air reach my lungs. Watching my son, calmly preparing our deaths, I felt as if I were staring at a stranger wearing Jalen's face. Lieutenant Delaney turned off the screen and faced us. "Now we have enough evidence," he said. "I'm authorizing an immediate arrest." I heard my voice break out, hoarse and shaking. Can we come?" Delaney looked at me for a second, then nodded. "Yes, but please stay calm and follow our instructions." When we got near the house, the whole neighborhood was washed in red and blue lights. Patrol cars were lined up thick around the corner. Reflective vests moved quickly, silently, coordinating like a machine. I sat in the car, gripping Leonard's hand. My heart hammered so hard I thought it would burst out of my chest. Over the radio, the officers' voices came rapid fire. Inside the house, Jalen and Simone were arguing loudly. Broken phrases overlapped each other. Simone's voice was high and sharp. Jalen's voice was guttural, tight as a drawn wire. Then Delaney's voice came, short, clipped, cold as an execution order. 3, 2, 1, go. The front door was forced open. In seconds, everything exploded. Jalen rushed out first, Simone right behind him. Both wore backpacks, their eyes frantic, darting like animals cornered. They didn't run straight. They stumbled like people yanked out of a plan that was about to succeed. "Police! Hands up!" The shout cracked through the air. Jalen froze. Simone froze too. 2 pairs of hands rose, rigid. Handcuffs snapped shut. They were escorted to a patrol car. And then Jalen's eyes met mine. No tears, no pleading, no regret. Only anger. An anger that was cold and deep, as if I were the one who had betrayed him. I stood there, my chest aching, and understood. There are moments when a mother doesn't just lose her peace. She loses even the image of the child she once believed existed. And right when everyone thought, "That's it, it's over," I realized something terrifying. What we had seen was only the surface. Jalen may have been the one carrying it out, but the way everything had been prepared, the dosage, the paperwork, the files, the timing one person at a time, it was too systematic, as if someone had taught him how to do it, as if someone had done this before. A few weeks later, Stella came to our house. She carried a stack of old papers, neatly sealed in plastic sleeves. Her expression was grave. "I found this." She set a newspaper article from 5 years ago on the table. An elderly man died mysteriously. His granddaughter inherited the entire estate. Police at the time suspected the victim had been poisoned using medication derived from the Chinese wisteria plant, but they didn't have enough evidence to reach a conclusion. I looked at the photo in the article. My heart dropped straight to the bottom. The woman in the picture was Simone, a little younger, but the eyes, unmistakable. We brought that article to attorney Danielle Kincaid immediately. Danielle studied it for a long time, then looked up. If this is true, we don't just have one attempted murder conspiracy. We may be looking at a repeating pattern. The investigation was reopened. And then what police found in Simone's apartment was more terrifying than all my guesses. They found a journal, not the kind filled with feelings, pages of detailed notes like a blueprint, targets, timelines, steps of manipulation, scripts for turning death into something natural. It clearly outlined the plan to kill Leonard and me. There were notes connected to the uncle-aunt, like the one in the old article. And most brutal of all, a line about eliminating Jalen later, when he was no longer useful or when he became a liability. The truth hit like an icy slap. Simone wasn't just an accomplice, she was the mastermind, and Jalen was just a pawn, manipulated, guided, pushed step by step into the abyss. After everything, Leonard and I still decided to visit Jalen, not because we had forgiven him, but because there are questions that, if you never ask, will follow you to the end of your life. The prison was so cold I felt my skin tighten. The air smelled of metal and bleach. The heavy slam of steel doors opening and closing sounded like layers locking away pieces of a life. Then Jalen walked in. He was thinner, his face was pale, and on his wrist, there was bandaging. I sprang to my feet. "Jalen!" He looked at us. This time his eyes didn't carry that sharp coldness from the day of his arrest. They were empty, exhausted, and breaking. "Mom, Dad." His voice was hoarse. "I'm sorry. I know. It doesn't mean anything. But I have to say it." I swallowed hard, my heart clenched like a fist. "Why did you hurt yourself?" I asked, my voice slipping. Jalen lowered his gaze, both hands trembling slightly. "Because I finally understand," he said, each word dragged up from the bottom of his throat. "The pain I caused. I destroyed everything. And I know I can't fix it." Leonard stood beside me, shoulders rigid. He stared at our son for so long I thought he wouldn't speak at all. Then he finally spoke, slow, heavy as stone. "You're right," Leonard said. "Some things can't be fixed." Jalen closed his eyes, as if stabbed straight through the heart. Leonard continued, still unsoftened, yet something else lived inside it. Not forgiveness, but a boundary. "But that doesn't mean you give up." I looked at Jalen. For the first time, I saw something real in my son's eyes. Not denial, not an act, but awareness, a late awareness of guilt. I drew a deep breath and spoke slowly, as if speaking to all three of us. Life still has a chance, even if it's small, for you to do the right thing. We stayed only about half an hour. We didn't promise we'd come back. We didn't talk about forgiveness. It was only a goodbye, and a hope as thin as a thread, but still hope. Because sometimes the only thing a mother can do is walk away carrying the truth and leave her child one last chance to live the right way. 5 years passed faster than I expected. Some days stretched endlessly. Some nights felt like they would never turn into morning. But time still moved, bit by bit, pulling us out of the dark. Leonard and I celebrated 45 years of marriage with a warm dinner at home, with only a few truly close friends. No big party, no show, just soft golden light, the gentle clink of glasses, and ordinary stories. Watching Leonard tell a story that made everyone laugh, I suddenly realized something. We had found joy again. It wasn't like before, not carefree, not naive, but it was deeper, and most importantly, more grateful. We carried scars that would never fade. There were moments when our hearts still jolted at the sound of a doorbell, a late-night call, or a name appearing by accident in someone's conversation. But we were still here, still alive, still holding hands as we walked into a new day. Jalen was still in prison. After he hurt himself, Jalen joined an education program for inmates and began studying law. He said he wanted to understand the system, and that one day he hoped he could help others, prisoners who didn't know what to hold on to, find a better path. Leonard and I still visited Jalen sometimes, not often. Not regularly, like an old family routine, because that old routine was dead, but enough to keep a thin thread, a thread not called forgiveness, but called awakening, and reminder that every choice has its price. And Simone was in a maximum security prison. She refused all contact, still denied everything, still blamed others, as if in her world truth was just something that could be bent to her will. I used to think I wanted to hear Simone say she was sorry, but then I understood. Some people don't apologize, and some sins, an apology is never enough to repay. On our anniversary night, after our friends had all gone home, Leonard and I sat on the balcony. The air was cool. The sky was full of stars. The city was quiet, like it had slowed its breathing after a long day. Leonard looked up and gave a small laugh, his voice low. Who would have thought? After everything, we'd still be here. I tilted my head onto his shoulder and answered softly, but firmly. Not just surviving, Leonard. We're living. I thought back to that fateful afternoon at the phone repair shop in Oak Park. That day, I only saw a tragedy swallowing my life whole. But now, looking back, I saw something else. Growth born from pain. Maybe that was the greatest victory. Not letting hatred, bitterness, or fear define me. Every day, I still had to choose again. Choose calm. Choose courage. Choose hope. And sometimes, choose compassion. Even when my heart wasn't fully ready. And you? Have you ever had to stand back up after a wound you thought would never heal? If you have, share your story in the comments. And if you want to keep walking alongside these journeys of courage, love, and healing, stay here with me. Every week, we'll learn together how people find their way to love, to trust, and to begin again, even after they've been shattered. Thank you for listening.